Aloha and welcome to the Kupuna Connections television series. My name is Cullen Hayashida, and this program is brought to you by Olelo Public Television, and we focus on senior issues that provide practical tips and advice to all of our viewers throughout the state. We are particularly excited today because we are usually talking about family care issues, but today we're talking about Encore careers, an issue that deals with those of us who are retiring or nearing our retirement age and are looking for opportunities to make a difference in our community. And with us today we have two guests, Jay Bloom and Dr. Stephen Cook, and welcome both of you. Perhaps we can start off, first of all, with Jay sharing a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm a recent transplant to Oahu. As I tell folks, I got here as soon as I could.
Thank you.
I'm a trailing spouse. My wife has started a job at the Tripler Medical Center. She's a social worker, and I'm pleased to be part of the islands. I've been an executive coach for 25 years, working with older adults as well as all age groups in life transitions, and I've been a human service administrator for 30 years.
Thank you.
Cullen?
Steve?
My name's Dr. Stephen Cook. I am a part-time instructor at the Kupuna Education Center at Kapi'olani. My full-time work is with the U.S. Army, and in the past I was a vocational rehabilitation counselor here on Oahu and also a military transition counselor for the Navy. And in that role, I work with transitioning service members returning to the civilian sector.
Okay. Actually, I was introduced to Jay Bloom several months ago, actually, by a personal, a mutual friend of ours in the state of Oregon, and it's been most enjoyable as well as very, very productive and enlightening type of discussions that we've had over time. And this man here is a tremendous tremendous asset to the state. I think that we can certainly use his talents and his wisdom just basically to help us move on to this next stage that deals with our boomers at this time in the 21st century. Now, what I wanted to first of all do was talk about our population of boomers. You know, those that were born between 1946 and thereafter, I think to about 1954 or something to that effect. And that number obviously is growing very, very rapidly. Perhaps in a few years there'll be millions that will fill our Social Security rolls. But we're finding that this is a population that we need to pay some attention to. And what do you think is happening as far as this particular population is concerned?
Well, essentially, the old paradigm was that you felt you got educated, you worked, and then you felt kind of lucky if you had any healthy years at the end of your life, was somewhat of the old model. Now, if an individual lives into their 50s in good health, the odds are they're going to live 30 or 40 more years of healthy living. So in many ways, it's a whole new stage of life. And to give you an idea how long a period that is, think of your age 20 and now you're age 50. That's a long period of time. And what you do with those years, there's a lot more opportunities and pluses to that. So the chance for an older adult to re-career themselves, get involved in the community, to get engaged in a variety of ways is a lot stronger. So older adults now can have a lot more to contribute to a community than before. I believe that eventually the boomer generation will retire the word retirement. In fact, I coined a word called returnment versus retirement. which is the act of giving back in some small way what the world is giving you. And I believe older adults will have that opportunity even more going forward.
Yeah, you know, years ago we used to hear of the Sun City idea of people retiring, going to some type of retirement community just for older adults, and you know, and just engaging in recreational activity, and that's it, you know, and that supposedly was the purpose of life, so to speak. But now, as you pointed out, you know, people are living much longer, and perhaps they're getting bored with just recreational activities. Or in Hawaii, flying off to Vegas annually, perhaps that gets old pretty fast, I suppose.
Well, I think again, the boomer generation, which is roughly the 1946 to 64 group, which is about 78 to 80 million, increasingly they want to live in intergenerational settings. And Hawaii has that history of having a number of generations together, and I think that makes it even more attractive for them. And they also want to stay engaged not only in terms of work, community service, but lifelong learning, which makes places like Kapi'olani even more important.
Right. Now, you mentioned retirement and retirement. Retirement, well, what's that all about? How has this concept of retirement changed or evolved over time, you think?
Well, you find too often, I would say, people not necessarily planning for their later years. And I often say that people often plan their vacations better than they plan their later years. And they often think if it's going to be one thing. The top three things that I hear in my executive coaching is I want to travel, I want to spend time with my kids and grandkids, and 3, I want to recreate. Well, what they often find is that eventually when you travel, you have to come back home. 2, your kids or grandkids have their own lives and they only want so much of your time. And 3, recreate only works if you have something as a contrast to it. You can get bored pretty quick. So if you've tended to use your mind in your work history or whatnot, you're going to want to tend to use that in your later years as well. And we also know with brain research that the more you keep your brain engaged, the more you're going to live longer, more vitally.
Well, when you look at the concept of the average male living to about 87 now, and you look at retirement age, used to be I'll retire at 55, then we looked at 62, now it's 65. And actually, in most conversations, people are looking at retiring at age 70 now. And this whole concept is changing rapidly. Number one, due to the current economic situation, we've seen a 5-year increase in terms of retirement planning potential. And also, Jay, you hit upon the health issue. Individuals who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s are far healthier now than a generation ago, and they're continuing to be more and more active. So the concept of sitting in the rocking chair just doesn't fit anymore, and that's one of the reasons that these types of discussions are becoming more and more commonplace in our society.
There's another feature that I think is going to emerge, and it's somewhat masked now by the recession, but there was just a report out last week by professor at Northeastern University back in Boston that was pointing out that it predicts we're going to have a workforce shortage in the next 5 years or so.
Yes.
And it doesn't appear to be that way right now given the recession and whatnot, but almost all major employers, whether governmental, healthcare, nonprofits, even and particularly the private sector as well, are concerned about a workforce shortage. Where we're going to find the people to do this work. So there's the potential positive nature of at the same time that older adults are increasingly going to want to work, that employers are going to have to find creative ways to keep them engaged. Because we don't necessarily want the same 70, 60-hour work jobs, 52 weeks a year, and so employers, I think, will start to think much more creatively how to keep them engaged.
Yeah, I think people are always going to perhaps want to look at the possibility of working, but they may want to change their work hours or the type of work that they want to do and find something that may have maybe some social purpose perhaps. Or so yeah, there'll be some changes, but this is a good time for them to begin thinking about that. Now, when you talk about retirement. There's some possible problems associated with retirement, some opportunities associated with retirement. What can you allude?
Well, I kind of describe it as a good news, bad news situation, Colin. The good news is as Stephen points out, that our age group has the potential of living longer, more healthily. It will be probably the most educated older population that we've ever had in human history. So there are pluses on that. The workforce, I think, will increasingly need people. I know the community sector, the nonprofit sector, needs volunteers and people to help out in a variety of ways. So those are some of the good news. Some of the challenging part is, that I say to folks, is it has to be customized. There's no roadmap necessarily for the individual. What works for you doesn't necessarily work for Stephen or works for me, and vice versa for spouses. It often becomes a journey with couples on how are they going to navigate that journey. So part of the bad news, it has to be customized. There's no necessarily a recipe that says this is how this is going to work. The other bad news is, aging to some degree is a series of losses as well. My 87-year-old father likes to say, the secret of successful aging is you celebrate what you can still do and not grieve too much what you can't do. So if you can't, run the 20-mile marathon, you celebrate you can still walk. And if you can't walk, you celebrate you're still in the wheelchair and not bedbound. So there's also the downside of do you still celebrate what you can do? So those are some of the good news and bad news about the aging.
Yeah. Okay. Some. I guess and as we get. As a young person, for example, we always tell young kids, what are you going to be when you grow up? Now, if you've got 4 more decades of life at 60, perhaps, potentially, the question is not what are you going to be when you grow up. You're already there, right? So it's a question. I mean, there's existential issues. What are you going to do with the rest of your life?
Well, that's a good point that you bring up, because this whole course that we've created addresses that issue. When you think about it, the average individual 20 to 40 years ago either went to college or didn't, learned a trade, or worked in more of a white-collar type of occupation. Those individuals did what they did and generally went with work that was in a localized area. They did what their friends did, their family, and they did what was available. In our day and age now, we live in a worldwide economy where opportunity is rampant to do almost anything and everything that you want to. Individuals looking at retirement now and looking at a retirement time period of 20 to 30 years are saying, what else is out there? And in our course, we're taking them back to those high school days to relive those ideas and dreams so they can re-examine themselves, and particularly their values, to say, gee, what would I like to do with the time that I have remaining?
Yeah, I like what Stephen said. In many ways, it's almost like a second adolescence. Because the two major questions that a young person goes off to college has to ask are, who am I that I'm not part of my family anymore? And then secondly, the second question is, what are you going to do? Well, the second adolescent period is somewhat of, who am I now that I've raised a family or had a career doing X and Y? What's important to me now? What are my values and whatnot? And then what's my work going to be? And a little broadly, I would define, how do I want to be engaged in the world?
Right.
In my later years. So they become, values clarification questions.
Very important issue. I may have mentioned this to you earlier. Once I ran into a friend of mine, 62, who just retired. And he says, Colin, I probably got 30 more years of productive life, but I don't know what to do with it, And I see people like that as running rudderless, basically, and it points to possibilities of even health problems that could appear as they lose some sense of direction as far as what they're doing. So it's when you look at the numbers of people that we're talking about, this can become a fairly significant problem if we cannot somehow marshal all of this. issue. Yeah.
I was going to say, I like to look at it as an opportunity.
Great.
So rather than as a problem, say, how can we take advantage of this human capital? How can we take advantage of all this expertise and wisdom to reinvest in our communities, whether it's through the traditional workplaces, re-careering, community involvement, intergenerational programs?
What are your thoughts with regards to how do we take advantage of this?
Well, I think you can start, there's going to be need for much more broker kinds of organizations, like the community college that can help people think through, whether it's Stephen's class or, through some other guidance, begin to think through what are some of those options. Do people want to go back and become a teacher? Because we know where there's going to be teacher shortages down the road. We know through your work the need for additional caregivers is going to be emerging, if not now, even more so down the road. So there are going to be a variety of vocations they can be involved. The nonprofit sector is under siege now in terms of funding, to what degree they can use additional volunteers and people who want to give back. There's a variety of ways that I think older adults can be involved.
Okay.
There's another component here also that is going to become critical for our nation in general, and that is, in the current situation, we have a large number of unemployed youth from that 18 to 24 age bracket that are not getting the skills that they need. They're not being mentored. They're not going through apprenticeship processes to keep us going towards the next century. And as we have this enormous group of baby boomers retiring, employers are going to have to be very actively engaged to take that 30 years of knowledge and create a process where individuals can mentor the younger workers coming up and provide a lot of mentorship and apprenticeship training so that they don't lose that knowledge in many of our industries. So that's another critical component that we're going to be facing. The way that's going to happen, and this is a good thing for our generation, is we're going to be able to be more creative and have more of a determining factor in how we want to work, the hours, the location, and our work situation. We're going to be able to define that more so that we could provide that mentorship to the younger generation.
Stephen brings out a very important point that employers need to pay attention to, and that's loss of knowledge and experience when older adults leave a particular workplace. Because I was involved back in Portland in a task force on vital aging that had a number of employers involved with it. And one of the things they found is that most all of that knowledge oftentimes is informal knowledge.
Yes.
It isn't written down. And unless you capture it, it leaves with you. And then the younger workers have a difficult time. What's down in the manual isn't necessarily how you do it.
Absolutely.
There needs to be much more proactive attempts by employers to capture that informal
Now, a lot
knowledge.
of times, though, employers are a little bit hesitant to employ older adults, thinking, well, we're going to be dealing with perhaps more health issues and therefore a greater overhead or something to that effect. How do you respond to something like that?
Well, those can be concerns. However, the loss of knowledge and the continuity for that company is, businesses are in business to make money and to continue growing and prospering. And employers have to look at that older worker as a true asset, as any other asset, and utilize that resource in a way that works for everyone. And in saying, well, we may not be interested in hiring an older worker, I think it's part of all of our job to educate them about the value and the work ethic and other values that the older worker brings to the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was, I think ARP actually did a national study that Stephen kind of intimates to, that looked at older workers and found they generally more reliable, more dependable, tended to use less sick days.
You probably don't have as many girlfriend-boyfriend problems, too.
I guarantee you they don't have as many tattoos or ear piercings or ear piercings. And and you're in a service job or whatever. I think the challenge for older workers, however, is also to be much more flexible in what they're often pursuing, and not necessarily looking at the high wage at this point in their life, or realize they need to re-career or get bone up on some of their technical skills,
Right.
or
right.
Stephen was mentioned earlier before we started the program about individual he was working with who didn't want to use, technology in the workplace. And, most workplaces, you have to have some working knowledge on that, and that needs to be, you need to bone up on that.
There's another change coming too that we're all experiencing right now, and that is that for many of us in this age bracket, even though we've been in the workforce a long time, we're seeing more and more younger individuals being our supervisors, mentors, or even business owners. And that is a trend that's going to significantly increase. So like Jay says, we've got to rethink the way we think in order to stay competitive and flexible in the workplace too.
Okay. Now let's go on to this course that we've been alluding to. This
Yes.
Kapi'olani Community College, through your efforts, has been looking at the creation of this Encore career course, this boomer transition course. Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, this whole concept came out of a thought I had one day. I've done transition counseling for the military in the past, and it is a marvelous program that fully marches a military person through a number of employment subject areas to re-engineer themselves to begin working in the civilian sector. And as I've looked out across the civilian side of the workplace, I didn't see that type of course readily available out there. Now, it is out there through independent coaches and counselors. However, this is such an important information that I felt that it was going to be critical, particularly looking at the older or the boomer generation, in order to prepare them to adapt and to continue working and to create the type of work environment that they wanted. So that's where the course has come from.
So what does this course cover?
Okay, the course covers, to start with, it really it starts by individuals taking a relook at themselves. We call that doing a life history, looking at where they've been, what they've done, and what they wanted to do. Okay, following that, we work, another section of the class is life philosophy. This is where you are, where do you want to go? So we help individuals address that. Other sections of the course include networking, which is the most key component of finding work and staying active in the workplace, or with community organizations. We look at resume writing, and we look at a couple other subjects. And all of this is geared around a self-exploration of yourself and goal setting for the future.
Oh, I see. So, having completed this course, I mean, where do people go from here? Are they able to actually find a job?
Well, that's the beauty of it. In our first class that we held, several were employed during the class time, found work that they wanted to do, and others began to develop a plan for the future that they're now working. So it's the planning phase that's just as important as the getting phase here.
So for people that are interested in perhaps looking at an Encore career, I mean, do you have any suggestions or tips for people of that sort?
Yes, the most important tip is start to examine yourself and your values and your current life situation. Because if you do that, you're going to be able to determine what you want to do in the future rather than just react to what's going on around you.
And people should start doing this, I suppose, even while they're still employed, possibly.
Oh, absolutely. It's far easier to do this shift if you are employed than if you're not employed.
Keep your day job.
There you go. Absolutely. Absolutely.
You got any points to make with regards to this whole?
I like to use in my coaching the concept of a portfolio plan.
Oh, okay.
That's similar to a financial plan where you diversify your assets and various things. That to age well, you need to have a diversification of involvements and whatnot. And that you begin, as Stephen said, doing that planning on where you're going to be involved in a variety of areas. People who tend to flunk their later years or flunk their retirement are folks that think it's going to be one thing that keeps them fully, satisfied. Like I said, play golf every day or garden every day or whatever. And you need a diversification of both how much time in work, community service, lifelong learning, time with family, and the quicker you begin to start to plan that and then begin to do some of that, the better off you're going to be. So if you fantasize, for example, or one of your thoughts is you might want to get involved in the nonprofit sector at the end of your career, don't wait until you retire from your day job or the private sector to do that. Begin to volunteer for a nonprofit. Begin to learn that and try that on.
I see. Okay. So retirement is perhaps oversold then as a concept, huh?
As I said earlier, I think before this generation is done, they will retire the word retirement.
Okay, that sounds like a good idea. Now, before we just have about a few more minutes left, so perhaps I could ask each of you to share just one last thought to our viewers. They've listened to all of what you've had to say. If you had just one last thing to say to our viewers that they could remember, what would that be?
I would say to start the process now.
Okay.
Start the process now, because you will have the time to work and evaluate yourself and move towards the future that you want.
Okay.
My quote, Colin, is that unless you're engaged in your later years, you're just dying longer, not living longer. So the key is to stay engaged and begin to think about how you want to be engaged in a variety of ways.
Wow. Okay. And that we should, continue to live in that respect. Wonderful ideas, great suggestions, and I hope that most of our viewers, I'm sure, are in this boomer category. They may just be channel surfing, but they are watching right now. And so I am certain that many of them will take what we have to say to heart. And so with that, let's just say that I want to thank all of you viewers out there for being with us today and to listen to what we had to say from both Jay Bloom and Dr. Stephen Cook with regards to Encore careers and the implications for yourself and to Hawaii. So thank you again for watching the Kupuna Connections television series, and hope to see you again next week, Saturday. Aloha.